Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to this Inquiring Mind sessions. My name is Guilherme, and today I'm gonna talk about ChatGPT, generative AI, and all that stuff. Um, and before anyone asks, no, I did not ask ChatGPT to make the presentation for me, although it helped here and there. For the agenda for today is very simple. First, I'm going to take you set the context for how these type of models like ChatGPT and stuff came about. Then I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief technical background on how these models work and what makes it possible for them to exist nowadays. Then I'm going to move on to specifically talk about ChatGPT and everything it does. Some practical applications, both for personal use and what business are doing to use it. Some limitations, and then what the future is in store for these types of models. Okay, so before jumping into straight into ChatGPT, it's important to frame the period we are in, and in order to do that, I'm going to talk a bit about how AI has evolved in the last few decades. So, as you probably know, most AI systems today are powered by machine learning, which is very broadly is when we use models that are trained on historical data to make predictions for the future in some capacity. This coupling of AI and machine learning goes all the way back to sort of the 90s, where there was this shift on how systems were built previously. So instead of specifying a task and then designing an algorithm that solves that specific task, instead we train the algorithm and make it predict how to solve the task based on previously observed data. And this caused a great shift because nowadays a wide range of applications could be powered by just one generic learning algorithm. So the most simple example is logistic regression, for instance. Despite this, some more complex tasks, specifically natural language processing, which we'll go back to later, and computer vision remains particularly hard to solve. And this would be the case until the last decade, 2010s, where we saw this sort of deep neural network revival under the moniker of deep learning. That's like the umbrella term for neural networks that have a lot of hidden layers and stuff like that. And it gained a lot of traction because of two main reasons. First, now we have access to way larger data sets, way more data is available. Everyone uses the internet. It's very easy to get data online. And secondly, because of the computational power and the availability of the current day GPUs, which are much more powerful than we previously had before. And it allowed for stuff that paved the way for models such as ChatGPT, which exists today.
Yes. The computational power?
Yes.
Is it like a special processor, or is like just a normal computer, or is it the graphic board? I don't.
Usually it's a ton, and I mean a ton of graphical boards just stacked on top of one of another, just training on gigabytes and gigabytes of data in simultaneously. It's a lot of but yeah, it's some server out there that's filled with a lot of GPUs that's training on the text data that it receives. So in order to produce these kinds of models, yeah. Okay, so I spoke about natural language processing, or NLP for short. And what is NLP? This is a subfield of artificial intelligence that is concerned specifically with language and has the goal of giving computers the ability to understand and to generate human language in much the same way as human beings can. The most common use cases for NLP were before and now were optical character recognition, which is when you convert images or photos of scanned documents into actual machine texts. Text to speech, for instance, which converts normal language text into speech, and vice versa. And sentiment analysis, which you use to identify and study the emotions on subjective information on a given piece of text. As you can probably imagine, this is the field that was by far the most affected by the rise of models like ChatGPT. By the end of 2018, it underwent a huge change because, and this draws parallels to what happened in the 90s. you originally had a specific task in NLP, where, so be it translation, sentiment analysis, etc., and you develop a model specific for that task, and then you use that model on that task only. But now, because the models have evolved so much, it's much better and much more computationally feasible to just take a generic model and adapt it very slightly to a specific task at hand, which would be called fine-tuning. And these types of models also basically solve the problem of generating general language, which before was considered like extremely difficult. And this is what caused the set shift. Basically, the entire NLP field now is focused on how to leverage these models. They are called foundational models, and then fine-tune them for tasks, be it summarization, dialogue generation, talking with humans like ChatGPT does. Now, a bit of context on the technical background. I'm gonna get a little bit technical here, but I didn't go too deep into it, so don't worry. Some concepts we need to know to understand how ChatGPT and other models like him came about are going to be presented here. So the first major concept that allowed for these breakthroughs is that of transfer learning. We as humans inherently have the capability of learning from a task and then transferring that knowledge to another task, right? So naturally, the closer the other task is to the task we know how to do, the easier it is for us to apply that knowledge to the other task. As I said before, this is not quite the case with machine learning. They specifically focus on specific isolated tasks, and this made it very hard to have general models. But transfer learning surfaced to tackle that exact problem. If you can take knowledge obtained from one task and then apply it to new tasks, then it's considerably easier and faster to get our models to the desired point. And in deep learning specifically, the most prominent form of transfer learning is called pre-training, where a model is trained on a general, more broad task and then fine-tuned to be used on more specific tasks. This is useful because you can get much better results on a variety of problems with way less problem-specific data, because you already have all the knowledge that the model was pre-trained on from the get-go. The problem with transfer learning is that by itself, it still requires a lot of labeled data. So it has like a hard limit on how well you can train a model just with it, because labeled data requires human intervention and can be very costly in time and computationally wise. So it's not really practical by itself. But this takes us to the second learning mechanism, self-supervised learning. So self-supervised learning, it lies somewhere between supervised learning, where we basically give a machine a cheat sheet of the answers it is supposed to give. The classical example is that of an algorithm that knows what a cat and what a dog is. You feed it a lot of images and say, this is a cat, this is a dog, and you keep doing this until the algorithm basically knows how to identify it without human aid. And then supervised learning, where we don't really know the labels of the data, but we try to cluster them together into similar patterns, so we can classify the class where the data belongs to. I'm not going to go very deep into this one specifically, because while it's a bit relevant to talk about, it's not the main focus. But what I want you to keep in mind is that self-supervised learning basically allows models to pre-train on huge amounts of data, and better yet, on unlabeled data. So this solves the problem that transfer learning had, where we needed a lot of labeled data. Many language models use this technique on pre-training process by taking large amounts of unlabeled data and then learning the labels by itself. One example of this, BERT, which was one of these first foundational language models, the input would be text, but during the input process, it would mask some words, it would hide some words from itself, and then it would have to learn what the words were with the context of the words around them, which basically made it label the data and learn a lot faster. And yeah, that's self-supervised learning in a nutshell. The third and final concept that we must talk about is transformers, and not the movie kind, but but yeah. Transformers came about roughly in 2017, and ironically enough, they were made specifically to solve one task, which was translation. They were made by a team at Google, and the gist of it is that they take sequential input data, so just a natural language, for instance, and then they process it and produce a desired outcome. What sets these models apart from the others is that they have this called what it's called attention mechanisms, and particularly self-attention. And this is not very trivial, so I'm trying just to give you a broad definition of it. Is that through the whole process of training, both the inputs and the outputs are constantly analyzed and every word is analyzed against other words in multiple different contexts to really understand the connections between words. So the model this way can learn relationships between words that are super far away from one another, and then learn the inner workings of a language much better than what was previously done before. This type of architecture, works so well because of two major reasons. Computationally wise, they process all the input data at once, which makes it super powerful when using large-scale data. And because it can be leveraged, you can leverage the amount of computational power you have. So all these GPUs can work at once. You can parallelize it, and then it works all at once. So it makes training substantially faster as well. And another thing is that results-wise, because of the attention mechanisms, the self-attention mechanisms, the context of words is basically is much better to understand the context of words. Typically, before this, we had what was called recurring neural networks and long short-term memories, which were LSTMs, and these were what was previously used for language processing. But the problem with those is that they had a limited reach. When you had a word, they had a limited reach back and forwards. So they would lose a lot of the context and therefore would not perform very well overall when dealing with natural language. As you can imagine, transformers caught on really quick in the NLP field, and basically every major model nowadays that has come out since uses them as its architecture, be it BERT, GPT, BART. They all have the transformer architecture as their base. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
So is this the same thing that things like DALL-E that does images based on the text? From what I understand, it does based on what's the next pixel, what's the probability of the next pixel to be green or whatever.
DALL-E doesn't work specifically like that, but they also use transformers. Yes, that is true. A lot of generative AI uses transformers, but it's not an architecture that is set in stone, right? So you have the general model of what the
but is the base the same? So the next pixel is, it's not that it's trying to draw, let's say, the Pope in a white jacket. It's just, if you have written white jacket, it tries to understand what's the next pixel what's the most probable next pixel for a white jacket.
I think so, something like that. I'm gonna be 100% honest. I'm not super in depth on how DALL-E works, but it is also with transformers. Yes, with encoders and decoders. Yeah. This was the part I was gonna ask you to ask some questions, but Guilherme is ahead of me on that regard. I'm just gonna take a sip of water and take a deep breath. If anyone else wants to ask anything, go ahead.
Sorry, so this was invented by Google in 2017.
The first transformer, yes.
So does this mean, so it wasn't used until then, or now they just found other use cases and then it just blew it?
No, this type of architecture didn't exist before. The paper is called "Attention is All You Need," I believe. That's the first time that this kind of architecture came about, and it, as I said, it was specifically to solve translating tasks. But because it's so good at what it does, it's easily adaptable. So that's why, yeah. Okay, moving on then. From the boring technical stuff. So now that we have all the puzzle pieces, transfer learning, self-supervised learning, and transformers, we can finally talk about ChatGPT. So what is exactly ChatGPT? In very, very simple terms, it's a glorified text predictor, like those you have on your phone. ChatGPT is a chatbot that was built on top of the GPT-N series of models that are developed by OpenAI, and more specifically runs on top of 3.5, and also now is starting to run on unlimited availability, but is also on GPT-4, and is fine-tuned specifically to answer questions by generating text. As an aside, GPT models is short for generative pre-trained transformer, and they are a series of large language model developed and built specifically for text generation. And a large language model is basically a language model that was trained on huge amounts of data. And a language model by itself it calculates the probability of what the next word or sentence is most likely to be correct. That's the basis of it. That's how it works. Just so we have an idea of how much transformer-based models are growing, we can take a look at some examples on this image. I mentioned BERT before. It already had 345 million parameters. GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters, and GPT-4 is now up to 1 trillion, which is basically an incomprehensible number. When I talk about parameters, I mean in language models, refers to the number of weights in the model's neural network. So a model with a larger number of parameters can potentially have way more capacity to learn the nuances of language and text and stuff like that. Although it's not linear. Just because it has 1 trillion parameters doesn't mean it's a million times better than BERT. That's not really how it works. But generally, more parameters means it can capture data better and therefore have better results. As for training data, for GPT 3.5, we don't really know. OpenAI started not disclosing what they are doing after GPT 3, but we do know that GPT 3, sorry, was trained on about 500 to 600 gigabytes of filtered common crawl data, 9 million documents from web crawl for another 40 gigabytes, some other data sets created by OpenAI, plus about 15 gigabytes of the English Wikipedia. So roughly 700 to 800 gigabytes of text data were what was used to train GPT-3. 3.5 and 4, probably a lot more too. So that just shows how much data and how much models have grown over the recent years, and why these new models are surfacing in such a number as they are today. Okay, continuing on with ChatGPT. Remember when I talked about transfer learning? That's basically how it was created. We take the base, which is a transformer, in this case GPT-3, GPT 3.5, and then we fine-tune it through transfer learning to be adapted to work as a chatbot. And then by doing so, we get ChatGPT. In addition to being fine-tuned on new data, it also used supervised learning and reinforcement learning with human intervention to just better learn how to communicate with people. And both these processes involved human interaction during the process. For supervised learning, the bot was fed example conversations where humans played both the human side and the bot side, so that it could know what type of responses it should generate. And for the reinforcement learning part, the humans the ChatGPT outputted answers, and the humans ranked the responses produced based on how good the answers were. And by doing this process iteratively, the model was fine-tuned, and then we got ChatGPT as it is today. So what is ChatGPT actually capable of doing? I'm sure most of you have already tried it a lot, but to give you the gist of its main features, its main selling point is how naturally it emulates human conversation. It's very good at understanding context, at keeping the conversation going, and responding in a manner that just feels natural. It's capable of many text-related tasks, answering questions, giving explanations, offering suggestions, summarizing information, writing emails, as Guilherme said. And it even is capable of creative writing, songs, poetry, impersonating people. It's pretty good at most of these. It's also important to know that in our area, because it's been trained on programming documentation, it's a pretty good tool for debugging, for writing excerpts of code, explaining code. It's very good at doing all of that. And also, as a nice bonus, it's pretty decent at filtering harmful content and misinformation for the most part. There's a use asterisk there. I'll get to it, but by design, OpenAI implemented a lot of hard rules and safety measures to help filter out harmful content and misinformation. And they'll probably keep doing that to make it so that that problem is attenuated. But yeah, we'll get to it.
Guilherme,
Yes.
it's a closed system, right? We have no idea.
It's a black box. We don't really know nowadays what it's training on. They
don't disclose the code, then you can't see and adjust by yourself.
Not since GPT-3, I believe. They don't. Yeah. Okay, so let's say you want to use ChatGPT for whatever reason, personal, professional, whatever. How can you better take advantage of it through your prompting? Well, first things first, the most important thing is to clearly define the goal of your question. This mostly goes without saying, but when you ask it something, it's best to already have something in mind. Do you want it to summarize a text? Do you want it to have some code explain? Having that intent in your head before actually writing will often be the most important step in getting the best results. After that, the number one tip I have is to be as specific, as clear as possible. Asking for a vague question on a topic can give you some information, but usually you want it to be really meaningful. So you have to be more specific and narrow it down a lot so it expands on the topic you really want to know about. You can and also should specify the desired output. For instance, instead of saying translate X sentence, you can specify translate X sentence from English to Portuguese. So you are guaranteed to have better results. There's a lot of options here. You can have it rhyme. You can have it in a table format. It really depends on what you're looking for, but it's relatively flexible in all of that. And I believe ChatGPT GPT-4 is even better, although I haven't gotten to try it yet. After that, adding constraints to fit your case should be obvious, but asking, for instance, to explain on a specific context on 2 short sentences, or like limiting the context of the information is also very important. So it once again narrows down the possible outputs, and it gives you the information you are looking for. And finally, if your question is complex, break it down into multiple smaller questions. Like in the example here, instead of asking what is climate change, break it down into multiple smaller questions that it can get into and address each of them. It usually goes point by point, so that's a good way of guiding the conversation, to say. So, yeah. If in case you want or need to integrate ChatGPT into an application or a product, it's relatively simple. The developers can use the API that OpenAI provides to get started with integrating it. It uses a pay-as-you-go model on a token count basis, and it's about 0.2 cents per 1,000 tokens. So it's cheap for personal use. It can quickly get out of control, but I think OpenAI offers deals for that type of stuff. And in tokens are basically, as you can see in the image, small subdivisions of words that it uses that are encoded and then are used to generate text. In this image, welcome to Imaginary Clouds IMS about ChatGPT. It's only 17 tokens, so it would be very, very cheap to use on an API, for instance. To get a little bit more detailed, these are the examples it uses for Python on its documentation. You call the function chat_completion_create. You select the model. For ChatGPT, it's 3.5 Turbo specifically, and then you pass it a series of messages. In the body of the message, you can optionally begin with the role of system, and that's basically to set the context of the conversation. So for the bot to have a high level idea of how to reply, you can customize the context a bit here in the beginning, so it's easier to guide the bot to where you want it to go. You can then send messages as both the user and as the bot to also, again, set the tone of the conversation. In the example above, for instance, if you just asked where was it played, how would it know what it is? So before doing that, you set the context by saying who won the World Series, and then where was it played, referring to the World Series. The response that the bot gives you is pretty standard. It has some metadata, the ID, the timestamp, the model used, the tokens used, and then it has the actual bot message, and then the reason it finished typing. So sometimes you exceed the token, so it finishes typing earlier. Sometimes it may have found harmful content on your message, so it finished typing earlier. When it stopped, usually it means it completed successfully. There are other ways to use the API, obviously, but I won't go through all of them. And this is the primary way to use it if you want to use ChatGPT specifically and GPT-4. There are other models and they use similar structure, but it's mostly goes around manipulating messages like this. Okay, some considerations to have when using ChatGPT. Obviously, there are the most general considerations. If it's appropriate, if it's really appropriate for your use case, if you have proper error handling in place, if you have the correct AI design that fits it, etc., etc. This should all be taken into account, and generally, and just basically, are a good exercise for when you are integrating any tool into what you're doing. More specific to ChatGPT, the considerations you want to have are similar to when you want to use it personally. You want to keep the prompts clear. You want to keep them concise to avoid ambiguity and variation on responses. There are also some parameters that are offered in the API specifically to allow you to control the variation. One of them is called temperature, for instance. It's a value from 0 to 1, where 0 is very little variation in our response, and 1 is just, it goes crazy. Yeah.
What do you mean by variation?
Sorry?
What do you mean by variation?
If you ask it the same question twice, a temperature of 0 means it will answer roughly the same way. A temperature of 1, it can like start doing wildly different responses. Yeah. Another thing that is important is to manage the context of the conversation, as we saw before. You have to ensure coherent responses and that they are contextually appropriate. And this means maybe keeping the logs of the conversation and passing it several times to the bot, and even considering fine-tuning the bot for your specific needs. You should incorporate user feedback in some way so you can monitor the conversation quality, make improvement adjustments as needed, obviously, and the usual privacy and data protection. It's important to address the privacy concerns, anonymize user data, establish clear policies for data usage, user content, etc., etc. Okay. So ChatGPT and other generative AIs have the potential and are already being used in a number of real-world applications in a number of different areas. The first and most obvious, obviously, is chatbots on other websites that allow for better customer support and virtual assistants. These chatbots are better able to understand and respond to user queries and to provide information and assist in tasks. As an example, there's a company called Babylon Health that is using GPT-3 to enhance their chatbot to have better symptom checking responses. In business, I don't know, writing PR emails, like you said, you can use it for summarization and reporting, because it's very quick to read the text, right? So you can just have it tell you the main key points. For instance, it's very good at summarizing, especially unstructured data that needs more processing. It's very useful on those use cases. Language translation, as mentioned before, it's important to know the context of words and the key entities on a sentence, and ChatGPT is really good starting point for that. And then for education and healthcare, virtual assistants in the form of conversations to help educate on specific subjects, because it also has a capacity to adapt its vocabulary to different ages. And for instance, for data analysis like me, it's a good way to generate data that's synthetic and based on possibly user data, but in a user-friendly way, because it doesn't compromise user privacy concerns by generating data, well, fake data like this. For more specific business side use cases, it's a relatively new technology, but you can already find a lot of use cases online. There's a lot of fun sites and stuff already out there that incorporate ChatGPT in some way. Some highlights I found, for instance, Roam Around, where it gives you, where you give it where you're going and how long you are staying, and then you can give it some restrictions and it plans an itinerary for you. Chef GPT recommends meals based on your ingredients, stuff like that. On corporate level, companies are also already using generative AI to enhance their internal practices. Morgan Stanley, for instance, used ChatGPT 3, GPT-3, and now 4 as an internal chatbot to query and synthesize their internal database, and its employees use it hundreds of times during the day. Bing, as you probably already know, already uses a modified version of GPT-4 that is fine-tuned specifically for searching. And for instance, Duolingo now recently introduced Duolingo Max that uses GPT as well to enhance language learning on their applications in the form of conversations and explanations. So hopefully that gives you an idea of many, many ways that you can use this kind of technology. It's very flexible.
Yeah, sorry. So
yes.
on the example, for example, with the Morgan's Stanley, and I'm sure you don't know all the details, but imagine we would like to use it at imaginary cloud. We've got Google Drive with all the information, but the information is blocked. There's permissions and everything. How would you ensure that that person has the right, can't access information that they don't have permissions to access? Is there like a model for each person, or the model automatically knows I can't share this information with this user that doesn't have the permission on, I don't know, something?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that having a model for each person is the correct use case. I would say it would be more along the lines of having that filter before the user logs in, for instance. They have different classes of user and stuff like that. And once you log in, it knows the documents you have access to in some capacity, and then it only gives you access to those documents. It would probably be something like that, I imagine.
Okay. Because I can see that there's being not an issue, but a key challenge or something that needs to be, everyone talks, or what I've been seeing on use cases is, now all of a sudden you can have access to all the information in your company. For example, in our case, or in the management case, I see a lot, like you're able to write, give me what was the sales revenue in the last couple of months, and what would be the projected something, which is fantastic because all of a sudden you've got all the information available. But yeah, you wouldn't want like an intern to be able to write that and get the information, because it's a bit more private.
Yes, it depends entirely on what you give it, I think, because if you don't want an intern to have it, because these systems are so black box, you can't really control what they output. You have to control the input, and so I would say that's the key. It would be to limit the documents it can access in the first place, and then go from there, I would say. Yeah. Okay. Now, so ChatGPT is amazing. It can do a little bit of everything if properly prompted. So why not just use it for everything and be done with it? Obviously, it's not that simple. I would be remiss not to mention the downsides that can come with the misuse of ChatGPT and similar models when it is left unchecked. So, what are some of the main concerns of the technology at the moment? First of all, there's an information cutoff at September 2021, which means that events and discoveries after the date are unknowable to it. And when I say unknowable, that's not entirely accurate. It's more correct to say it has limited knowledge, because there were some instances already where it was able to respond with current information that it would have no way of knowing if the cutoff was really a hard cutoff. But for the most part, it's true. If you ask it who is ruling England, it still says it's the Queen. So that's something to keep in mind. Another problem with these kinds of models is the bias and unfairness that can come built in with them. As we saw before, these types of models and generative AI overall are trained with massive amounts of data, and therefore it's very hard to guarantee that all the data there is fair and unbiased. These biases can be hard to detect and can manifest in many ways: gender, racial, cultural biases. I read an interesting paper while researching for this presentation that did an analysis on this. And the main problem of this is that because these models are what's called foundational models, and every other model that comes after them that is fine-tuned from them inherits all these biases. It's important to keep in mind that they are critically evaluated and that the outputs are smoothed out over time, because the biases that the foundational models have will also trickle down to the fine-tuned model. So that's important. It's important to keep retraining, to keep evaluating the data sets to make sure that this doesn't happen. On the same vein, there are also some ethical and privacy concerns. A lot of the training data is user-generated, and this can include private and sensitive information, which is obviously an issue. Another ethical concern is the misuse of these tools, spreading misinformation. It's very hard to detect if it's real or not, so the impact they will have is not known. There's also the issue of the potential impact it will have on employment, and these questions don't really have an answer yet, and they will require a lot of discussion and regulations and responsible practices going forward. By far, the biggest problem of ChatGPT, as Guilherme already pointed out, is the hallucinations. Hallucination is a term used in AI that refers to when generative AI generates outputs that may sound plausible at first, but then are factually incorrect or are just unrelated to the context we give it. It's a very big problem, and it's probably the most impactful one when it comes to using ChatGPT by the public in general, for a number of reasons. It can lead to a loss of trust in systems where AI is implemented, and then it decreases its adoption. It can accelerate the spread of misinformation very easily, and is very hard to detect due to how black box ChatGPT and derivatives are on how they reach their answers. And if it's used on critical fields like healthcare and finance and law, etc., it can have real bad consequences. So it's very important to keep that in mind. There have been a big number of cases of misuse of ChatGPT. Just to highlight a few of them, recently a lawyer used ChatGPT on his research for a case, and he didn't know it could produce false information. So as a result, it basically made up quotes, judicial decisions, internal citations. They were all completely false, and the lawyer obviously faced sanctions over it. In an example of ChatGPT being used with ill intent, a man in China was recently arrested because he was creating fake news, and there was one fake news he created specifically about a train crash that didn't happen, reached thousands of people that believed it was true. And this example basically showcases how easily it enables the spread of misinformation on the internet. And finally, just to show the privacy concern side of things, Samsung recently banned the use of ChatGPT by their employees because the chat history could at any time be used for training, and obviously information that is put there by employees could be incorporated in the training data and could possibly leak out due to that, and also due to security reasons. There was once a security breach where other people could access your conversations. So critical information could be there if you use it to talk with ChatGPT, and then would be compromised. So it's very important to watch out for stuff like this. So not all is bleak. It's not a dark future. We know the main issues with generative models, but then what's the way to attenuate them? As a general guideline, roughly speaking, if it doesn't matter if what ChatGPT outputs is real, then it's pretty safe to use. You can go ahead and go wild with it. But if it does matter, and if you have enough expertise on the subject and are willing to take responsibility for inaccuracies, then you can use ChatGPT with an asterisk. But if any of these other statements aren't true, it's probably best that you don't use it at all. It's much better to use it as an enhancer rather than just deploy it on its own, because it can easily generate misleading content, as we saw before. It's best that you implement robust error handling strategies, fact-checking mechanisms, and having a human in the loop is usually the best way to prevent stuff like this from happening. Having user feedback and having human intervention occur often on when you use ChatGPT play crucial roles in mitigating these risks. Of course, there's an ongoing research and development effort that focuses on improving these models' accuracy and addressing the limitations, implementing safety measures. But on a higher level, it's important that the AI community collaborates with one another and with external stakeholders to help identify the major risks, to develop best practices, and promote general responsible use of language models. As for the future and where we go from here, we already have other chatbots on the market that are direct competition for ChatGPT, like Bard. Other LLM-based solutions are sure to arise as we go on. This will snowball very quickly. GPT-4 is also already on limited availability, and it has a number of improvements. It features longer answers and questions, more complex questions. You can even input images as an input. It also suffers from hallucination problems still, so that's not fixed yet, but generally it tends to get better over time. The advancements on the NLP field will also improve results and quality of answers, be it in their reliability, their fairness, and in their accuracy. This will all tend to get better over time. And chatting is not the only possibility for generative AI. Obviously, I talk mostly about ChatGPT, but image generation, video generation, and stuff like that is also seeing rapid growth, and they are getting more involved too. And it's only a matter of time until it spreads to other fields like virtual reality, augmented reality, video games, etc., etc. There's a lot of possibilities to still expand, and we should expect to see those in the future.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry. Yes.
So things like DALL-E, so the image generation thing, the other that everyone talks about,
Midjourney.
Midjourney. What's their relation to ChatGPT? There's no, right? It is just there's no.
Very tangential. They use transformers too, but that's basically it, where it stops. They have entirely different methods of generating stuff than ChatGPT. They encode text similarly, I guess, but decoding it is an entirely different story. Yeah.
Okay. They are just part of that field called generative AI.
Yes, generative AI. ChatGPT is a generative AI that generates texts. There's a lot of models like that. DALL-E is an image generation. There's also video generation now, I think. I don't know the specific names. Yeah, all of that is generative AI, yes. ChatGPT, to be more specific, is generative AI that generates natural language. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen another one which is amazing, which does a speech. So they are able to
speech generation. Yeah, there's a lot of it nowadays. Yeah,
and with like flawless voice. So you could put someone talking and you wouldn't notice.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Any other questions that I can answer? Hello,
Yeah.
Alexandre, sorry.
Great presentation. Thank you, Ken. I was just wondering if you mentioned that you haven't tried the GPT-4, but there are a few companies that, for example, Perplexity.ai and Find that allow users, even free users, to use a certain amount of GPT-4 connections to answer their questions. Find is for programmers. Perplexity AI has a lot of sources that provides in their answers, so we can verify also the answers. But how are they able? If you have any idea, how are they able to use the API, simple API, and then they would probably like get the results from GPT-4 and then output it with their own content. I'm just wondering if there's.
I would say, well, for you to use, I'm gonna go from the assumption that GPT-4 also works the same way as GPT-3 with prompt manipulation and stuff like that. I would imagine that these companies having access to GPT-4 would have an intermediary step where they manipulate your prompt in some way. You send them their prompt, and for instance, if it's related to programming, as you said, you send them a prompt, and then they manipulate it a bit, like add more context before or after your prompt to make sure the output is exactly what they say the output is. So mostly managing context, that's mostly the way you can manipulate ChatGPT and GPT-4 is by manipulating prompts. So there's not much you can do about it other than having like a middle step where they manipulate your prompt and having the output be more adequate to their use case.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure how can those business models work if you have to spend some money to get the answer from GPT-4, probably a lot more than GPT-3 or ChatGPT, and then provide these to everyone. How well? I would have to investigate further, but
Yeah, me too. I would say it's just the convenience, I guess, to have a tool that does it for you, so you don't have to manipulate the prompt yourself.
I can give you an example of the tool we were just discussing. So we use copy.ai, which is, it's pretty much just a layer over ChatGPT, but totally adapted to copywriting. So if I want to write a PR message, an email, an outbound, even a recruitment email, I just go there and say recruitment email, and it has hidden prompts that fires to ChatGPT, so it provides me a really, really good output. The way it works is you pay, in our case, is like 50 euros per month. And I'm sure what they have done is they have an average of, I don't know, a user will use, I don't imagine, 10,000 prompts per month on average. So it costs me 40 euros and I'm charging 50 euros. So I get a profit of 10 euros. Some will use more, some will use less, but looking at large numbers is just they make a profit. And for us, it's still very valuable, but because we pay 50 euros for 5 people, and I can tell you, from those 5 people, 3 might use a bit, 1 a lot, and 1 pretty much 0. So it ends up being worth it for the company, and for us, it's quite worth it as well because 10 euros per month to save, I don't know, 8 hours of work in a month. It's totally worth it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it makes sense.
If you want to try ChatGPT-4, we have access also through that tool, and yeah, you can try it if you want.
That's cool. Thank you, and thank you, Alexander.
Thank you.
Anything else? No? Okay. Okay, so for the practical exercise, I was going to have a competition between Coimbra and Lisbon office. Unfortunately, Coimbra all bailed, so we only have the Lisbon office, but I guess everyone can be free to try it. I tried it, and ChatGPT knows what imaginary cloud is. So I guess, so the objective here is to just have some fun with prompts. Make it write a prompt about imaginary cloud if you want to participate, and try to have it do all of these things in one prompt. I'll give you, like, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, and the first person to do it wins, I guess. Go ahead, have fun. I already have an answer too. I can show you after in the end.
Guilherme, we have Coimbra and Lisbon team, okay? So me and Alexandre belongs to Coimbra, so we can.
Okay, then we can have the competition.
Challenge.
we are greatly outnumbered, but
Viva, eu acho que consegui pôr o ChatGPT a dar-me informação falsa. Sorry, in English. I believe I made the ChatGPT give me false information. So I made a specific question based on Pokemon on the games for the Game Boy Advance, and on the Sapphire and Ruby version, there is only one Pokemon that can induce rain weather while fighting. And that Pokemon is Kyogre. It's one of the legendaries. And I asked him exactly that. In Pokemon Sapphire for the Game Boy Advance, what Pokemon can I use to change the weather to rain? And he gave me Kyogre and also gave me Cast Form. And he says that Cast Form has the ability, based on the weather, it will change forms. And he's telling me that it will change form and induce rain when it changes to the rain version of the Cast Form.
Well, that's 1 point for you, Andre.
He got mixed up because the ability of Cast Form is to change its appearance based on weather. If it is raining, it looks like a drop of water.
And then you do the weather ball thing, right? And
yes.
Yeah. I love Cast Form. He's so cute.
So we were able to get ChatGPT to not be able to provide information. So we first asked him, what does imaginary cloud do? It answered amazingly well. And we asked them, why do they have such a cool and sexy growth team? Not as good of an answer, because it said, it's a matter of personal opinion.
Oh, meta commentaries.
It
that's
is a lie.
then-
It is a lie, Guilherme.
And then we asked them, what is Imaginary Cloud's chief operating officer, which answered amazingly well, saying that it was Eva Pires dos Santos,
With my full name.
which we don't know how they got the full name because we
Really?
don't have it on the website.
Yeah.
And then we asked,
Wow.
based on Andrea Santos' comment, we asked, does Eva Pires dos Santos Alves like Pokemon? And it said it has no information about it. So
Very, very bad. Benjamin, do you have something for us? Did you win?
Not much. I was struggling to get in because now after login, I went to the platform where I can create apps. So only now
Okay,
I'm
Benjamin
starting
is
to
lost.
write things. Yeah, I'm
I
lost.
think
I'm lost.
ChatGPT is a little addictive because I'm always asking about stuff about imaginary cloud, so it gives me all the like answers that what the company is.
This is mine. This is what I did. I asked him to make a Kermit the Frog impression, to give me facts about it, its CEO, the founding year, how many members, and told him to specifically omit references to being an AI and to the cutoff point because it starts being like, oh, as an AI, I don't know anything, and I don't want him to do that, and do it in one paragraph only. So this is the answer I got. After some experimenting, I did some experimentation, but yeah. Our
I think
greatest product, the Pixie Planner.
that would be a cool nickname for Tiago. Imagine.
Imagino Green.
oh my God.
But yeah, hopefully this allows you to see some of the features of ChatGPT, what you can and cannot do with it. Use it responsibly. Sorry, back to the presentation. I don't have anything else to do. Yeah, that's it. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully this put ChatGPT and the generative AI models in context of where we are, and also the advantages and disadvantages of using it. And I hope you enjoy your dinner, to whom it may concern. Well, I hope everyone enjoys their dinner, but yeah.
Thank you, Guilherme, for the presentation. Good one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Guilherme.
Thank you very much, Guilherme.
You guys, bye bye.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.